If you've ever wondered about investing in triple net leases and how it could be an awesome opportunity compared to multifamily without some of the drawbacks of the expense management and the sometimes weak guarantor situation of tenants, then you need to listen to this episode today. I've got an amazing guest on here who specializes in this, and it's very eye-opening. Hey, welcome listeners today and viewers. I have the distinct honor and privilege today of having Dan Lewkowicz on the show. He is a senior director of Encore Real Estate Investment Services, has 20 plus years of experience in real estate. His focus now is in commercial real estate and investing, but it's got a pretty diverse background from residential to commercial. And he's got a really interesting take on triple net real estate investing. And so I want to pick his brain on that today, go deep. That's a topic that we don't hear a lot about. I mean, people are familiar with the idea of signing a triple net lease if you're a tenant, or if you're an owner, maybe assigning a triple net lease to one of your tenants. But as far as investing in that, I'm intrigued. So Dan, welcome to the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Looking forward to this, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, you bet. So tell us a little bit about first of all, how you got in commercial real estate, kind of just your glide path to where you are now, and then we want to learn more about this triple net thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my kind of pivotal moment where I really got interested and involved at the same time in real estate investing goes back, like you said, just about 20 years. I was actually running a sales department, or I was running the sales part of a business that I started with some friends. It was called Disability Made Easy. It is a barrier-free home modification company. Company's still around. My best friends are running it. I'm no longer involved. But back about 20 years ago, I had always had a sales and marketing background. That's just what I love doing. And my good friend and I got together and put this business together. So again, I was doing the sales and marketing, but I would occasionally take trips out with our project manager to go look at properties and quote them out. So I remember, I'll never forget this. I took a long drive out the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Michigan, couldn't even tell you where. We got out of the truck and went into the house. There was a gentleman who had been in an auto accident like 20 years prior. And we walked out of the house, and I said to our project manager, I said, let's get out of here. Like, there's nothing we can do here. This house is completely outdated and functionally obsolete. There's no way someone in a wheelchair can have any quality of life living here. Didn't respond, took out a piece of paper, a graph paper, and a pen, and started drawing. And in about 90 seconds, he had sketched a brand new front elevation and a new layout to the property. And that's the moment that it hit me that in real estate especially, you can take something that is maybe functionally obsolete, make some changes, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's got tremendous value and it's better suited to its occupant. So I kind of took this understanding and this epiphany, if you will, and I applied it to the purchase of my first home. This was during the last recession, and it was time for my family and I to move out of an apartment, buy our first home. Found something that was move-in ready. Everything was great. We were all happy, got ready to sign the contract. And I said, let me, look around a little bit more. I had heard that there was some bank-owned property one street over. So I got in touch with one of the lenders. They told me about a property, same exact size, same bedroom, bathroom count. This one happened to have a pool as well. And, it was probably about 30% of the price. So I ended up buying that house, and I hired out all of the trades, right? Because I wanted to learn how to do what our project manager had done, right? Take something that was functionally obsolete and add some value and make it better, make the total thing that you create better than everything you put in. So I did that. My friends joked with me. They said, Dan, what are you going to do with your life when you're done renovating your house? And I half joked back and said, I'll just buy another one. And that's exactly what I did. I bought another one, probably 100 houses later at this point. And it just became, kind of a passion. I mean, I look at, single family house flipping, I call it a gateway drug into real estate, because that's really what it was for me. All the while, I was working at major corporations like Amazon. Eventually I went full-time into house flipping. And then as, kind of the real estate climate changed, I was approached with an offer to work at a commercial real estate brokerage. And I kind of weighed my situation of, hey, I'm investing my own capital, I'm borrowing from friends and family, I'm getting private money loans, I'm, putting in all this hard work, I'm, getting up in the middle of the night because the police are calling me because a property's broken into, right? And sometimes you score big and sometimes you don't score big. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you lose, right? So I looked at that and I compared it to brokerage, and that's when I made the switch 100% into full-time commercial real estate brokerage, and that was about 5.5 years ago, and it's been tremendous. I mean, I still have to scratch that itch, right? I still see, I'm a recovering house flipper, so I still have to flip a house every now and then, but my main focus, 99.9% of my time, energy, and effort goes into commercial real estate brokerage.
That's funny, gateway drug. I've never heard it called that before, but
It
I have
is.
interviewed so many, and we have so many clients that's how they get started in investment real estate, and then they look to scale. Inevitably, the question becomes, how can I do this at scale,
Yeah.
and how can I, to your point, have so many moving parts, to minimize that, but yet grow and scale. And so then they talk about multifamily and syndications and things like that, and commercial, and
Yep.
getting out of the single family space. But very cool though. So it started with an epiphany. It sounds like, and really, that's kind of cool, right? You just kind of hit with a box or a bricks from heaven, right? You said, "Wow, we can do this," and it started you on this completely different pathway. So, all right. So, with all that experience and passion and living that, and then you moved into commercial real estate as a broker. Talk to us about that. What have you learned there? What are the opportunities there? And how do you get to where you are today?
You mean specifically in the commercial real estate brokerage space?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so like I look at it, my best house flip, I'm not going to talk too much about numbers, but my best house flip, right? Which again, that's the best one. I've lost money. I'm not going to lie. I've lost money on houses.
Sure.
There's nothing worse than being into a house and not being finished and knowing every dollar you're putting in is just a dollar that's going to have to come out of your bottom line, but you got to finish the house, right? I've been there before. It's not fun. In commercial real estate brokerage, I'm not using my own cash. I mean, to me, I've invested a lot into my business, but in the beginning, especially, I wasn't using that much of my own cash. Very little risk. I can do it from anywhere, either from my office or from another part in the country if that's where I am at the time. And when I have a closing, typically your average commercial real estate transaction affords you a closing that's going to be the same or significantly better than the best house flip you could have. So to me, it makes a lot more sense. I'm using a lot more of my brain than I am, my brawn. I don't have that much brawn, but, so I think that's tremendous. And then, the opportunity to learn and grow. Like I always tell people, I'm learning every day. My clients are my biggest teachers. I learned things that I never would have even thought about or imagined just by being a commercial real estate broker. It's also taught me and trained me to be a good investor. And I'll give you a perfect example. I have a very close friend. We've done a number of deals together. He reached out to me because, prior to our show, we were talking about, Chesapeake, Virginia, and a specific deal there. So I was working on a specific deal in Chesapeake, not too far from where you are or you were. And, we were working with a major national tenant by the name of Starbucks. My friend knew about it. He called me. He said, Dan, I've got this deal. It's a office building and some vacant land, and the vacant land is going to be converted to a build to suit for Starbucks. Can we talk about it? So I was like, sure, yeah, let's talk about it. And we went through the deal, and I was like, oh, I like this deal. This is cool. Everything's great. Well, fast forward a couple months, he came to me. He says, Dan, you remember that deal with the Starbucks? I said, yeah. He goes, well, we're going to do a joint venture and put together a loan to the owner of that property. And I was like, dude, I want in. I knew the deal. I understood the deal. If I wasn't a broker, I wouldn't understand the deal. And then I did something really cool. I love this. I took my SEP IRA. I'm self-employed, so I have a SEP IRA. I took my SEP IRA. I sent it over to Equity Trust, which is a custodian, and I was able to actually invest my SEP IRA into this loan, right, which has a fixed interest rate payment. And then I can then take that and it goes back into my IRA and grows, and it's tax deferred until when I take it out. So cool, that opportunity wouldn't be there if I wasn't in the position and in the seat that I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, you're exposed to so many more opportunities, circumstances, deals. You see so much, and so your learning curve is accelerated, right? And you meet so many interesting people. And I see the same thing, not only from the show, but clients and opportunities. And it's funny that you're headquartered in Michigan, but you did a deal in our backyard in Chesapeake. And I know we talked earlier before we hit record that you service clients nationally, so we'll get into that some too. Let's fast forward now and talk about this idea of triple net leasing, because I think that is a concept that a lot of people aren't familiar with. The investing in that. What is it? How does it work? How does one get involved, and what kind of returns and things do you typically see?
Yeah, I just gave a master class on this last week for Jake and Gino. Would love to pull up I put together a real nice presentation, but essentially we can do it without the slides. So, net lease is the reason it's called net lease is because the rental payment is net to the landlord. And I'm going to explain what that means. So the way I like to define what net lease is by defining what it isn't. So a lot of people are going to be familiar with multifamily. So for the purposes of this explanation, we're going to compare multifamily to net lease, and I think it'll become very clear as to what it is. So let's talk about, and this is hypothetical, right? So it's a hypothetical, not exact numbers, but we got a small multifamily. It's bringing in $125,000 annually in gross collected rents, right? That's your top line number. Your gross collected rents, $125,000. We'll call it, it's a 10 unit. They're paying $12,500 a year. Not a high end apartment complex, okay? But your gross collected rent, $125,000. Now let's take a Wendy's deal. We're going to get into this later in terms of like the difference between different Wendy's deals and different net lease deals. But for our purposes, typical Wendy's deal, they're paying $125,000. That's your gross collected rent. Okay, so you look at the deal; it's exactly the same on the top line, on the gross number. Now, if you look at the multifamily deal, there's going to be expenses, and those expenses could be 50% of your gross collected rents or so. So you've got things like what? Management. You've got things like capital expenditures, right? You might have to replace the roof or the parking lot. You've got things like snow plowing and landscaping, cutting the grass, shoveling the sidewalk. You've got vacancy. I think I said management. You've got taxes. You've got insurance, right? All kinds of things. So your $125,000 at the end of the day might be $60,000, right? When you get rid of all of those expenses. Now let's go back to the net lease deal, that Wendy's deal. Again, $125,000 gross collected rents. But what's awesome about the net lease deal is the $125,000, that's net to you, the landlord. So watch this. The tenant pays for your taxes. The tenant pays for your insurance. The tenant pays for any common area maintenance. They pay for roof, structure, parking lot, management, whatever there is, you spare zero expense. Now that's what's called an absolute triple net lease. That's like the gold standard cookie cutter bread and butter deal. Not to get too complicated, but there are other similar types of deals. For example, a double net lease. Double net is exactly the same. So tenant pays taxes, tenant pays insurance, tenant pays for any common area maintenance, management, snow, any of that stuff, landscaping, all that good stuff. What they don't pay for in the double net lease, they don't pay for roof, they don't pay for structure, and depending on the lease, they sometimes also don't pay for parking lot as well. That's going to be called a double net lease. There's other types of leases like a gross lease, which is much more similar to a multifamily lease, right? Where it's very common in shopping centers where the tenant pays gross rent and then the landlord pays all expenses. But typically what we do, especially in the single tenant, meaning one tenant, one building type of universe, that's going to be an absolute triple net deal or a double net deal. But you can see here why they're so attractive. In addition to them being 100% passive, right? They're mailbox money or coupon clippers, if you will. Another nice thing is they're very predictable because everything is spelled out in the lease up front. So if your lease has annual escalations, maybe 2% annual escalations or 10% every 5 years, you know exactly what you're going to be collecting for the duration of the lease. Every little thing is spelled out. And those leases are typically very long term. 15, 20 years is very common. So, you got the stability, security. Another nice thing, predictability, I said. Another nice thing touching on the stability and security is that the leases are often guaranteed by hundreds, if not thousands of units. What I mean by that, let's contrast that to multifamily. If Mrs. Jones rents from us in our multifamily property, the guarantee is Mrs. Jones. If Mrs. Jones goes bankrupt, right, or doesn't have any money, guess what? We have no recourse to collect the rest of our rent. Now, let's take a look at like a Walgreens lease. If it's a corporate seal, they have thousands of locations. Even if they're doing poorly at your location and they leave, they're still on the hook to pay for the rent unless they bankrupt the entire company, which, by the way, does happen. See Rite Aid, for example. But, it's not nearly as common. And again, I touched on this a minute ago, but if you look at a Wendy's deal, you might think that, you're driving down the highway, you see a Wendy's, and that Wendy's is exactly the same as the one you see 4 miles down the road. And that's not true. Number one, the lease term could be different. Number two, very importantly, the guarantor could be different. One of them could be like, Paul and Dan opened up an LLC. We got sick of real estate, then we started flipping burgers, and it's just us, right? It's just our one unit. And if something goes wrong, if Paul says this isn't for me or Dan says this isn't for him, right? Guess what? The person that owns that building has no recourse because we could bankrupt our one unit company easily. The one that's 4 miles down the road, right? They might have 400 units. So if they're not doing well, they have to keep paying you. So that's another, aspect of net lease that's important to pay attention to. I think we'll leave it at that for now because I've got a lot more to say, but I don't want to, bombard it all at once.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So very, very cool. So these triple net leases. So do you generally see, you're talking now about single tenant. Is that generally the case when we're doing triple net or?
Yeah. The triple net leases are typically single tenant. I do sell a lot of shopping centers. I just had a closing the other day of a shopping center. Those can be triple net leases, believe it or not, because what's typically happens is, you have to look at the leases, and that's why you need to work with a good broker. But in some cases, they are gross leases where the tenant pays rent and the landlord pays expenses. Mm-hmm. But more often than not, we're seeing more and more triple net leases. And I advise my clients to convert the leases to triple net leases when they roll over, when they have an opportunity to. And typically the way that works is let's make it easy. You've got 10 tenants. They're varying sizes in your shopping center. What you do is you look at the square footage that this tenant in question occupies relative to the entire GLA, the gross leasable area, So they might occupy 13.2%. So many leases are written that saying that a tenant will pay their pro rata share of the expenses. And then at the end of the year, the landlord does a reconciliation because things go up in price, right? And once there's that reconciliation, that is now passed back to the tenant. That's a great way to increase the value of your shopping center and decrease, the unknown, decrease expenses is to convert to triple net leases. And like I said, they can be done in single tenant and also in shopping centers as well.
Okay. So, I have some questions, but obviously continue on the process here because I'm kind of formulating them and I don't want to get ahead of where you're going.
Yeah. So listen, like I said, it's very easy to just say a Wendy's is a Wendy's is a Wendy's, and it isn't, right? So I mentioned guarantor strength and size, right? Dan and Paul Burgers LLC, we're small, where we don't have a strong guarantee, right? But if you're looking at like Meritage, they have like 355 locations, and they're a publicly traded company, so you can get their financial information. So it's important to know who is signing on that lease, because if Dan and Paul sign on the lease and it's a 20-year lease, you're betting on just us to succeed at just this location. Right. Whereas if Meritage signs on the lease and something goes wrong, you've got a lot more certainty and a lot more stability there. So that's very, very important. Another thing to take a look at, not always available, but they're called sales reports, right? So a lot of quick service restaurants and pharmacies do provide mandatory annual sales reporting to the owner. So if I'm looking at a Wendy's that does 1 million in sales and I'm looking at a Wendy's that does 2.7 million in sales, obviously I want the one that's 2.7 million. Now, to go on a little tangent, in the quick service restaurant field specifically, which is one of the asset classes I do a lot of transacting in, you want to pay attention to what's called the rent to sales ratio. And very simply, that's what are they paying in rent relative to how much they're doing in sales. And typically we want to see a quick service restaurant doing at most an 8% rent to sales. Rather see them at 7.5 or 7 or lower. Once you get into the 9, 10%, even though it's only 1 or 2%, there's a much higher likelihood that store is eventually going to close. So that's really important. Another thing we want to look into is the traffic counts, right? How many cars are traveling in front of that property every day, right? Are there 15,000 or are there 50,000? And obviously the more traffic, the more exposure, the more the tenant is likely to do well there. Ingress and egress, how easy is it to go in and out of the property? Give you a great quick example. A couple of years ago, I sold a property for a great client of mine. It was a Wendy's here in Michigan, and it was doing really well. 64-unit operator, so decent size. All of a sudden, the city said, you know what? This is near a university, a lot of foot traffic. We want to put one of those things in the center of the road where essentially pedestrians can come, stop in the center of the road once they're crossing, wait until the other side is clear, and keep going. Sounds great, right? The problem is they put that thing right in front of the drive-through. So it was almost impossible for people to go in and out of the building. There was a lawsuit. It was complicated, but the bottom line is it really hurt the sales of the store. So that's just an example. Additionally, I tell people when you're looking at net lease property, another very important factor is the proximity to other national retailers. In fact, when I'm underwriting a deal and looking at a deal and trying to understand what the value of the property is, one of the first things I look at, in addition to population density, average household income, which we'll talk about, is the proximity to major national retailers. If Walgreens is there and Walmart is there and McDonald's is there and Chick-fil-A is there and Discount Tire is there, well, they all have real estate departments. They're all getting paid to make good real estate decisions. If they feel that's a good location, I think that's an argument to say it is a good location. Number one, and number two, that's going to bring traffic to the area, right? If you have a Walmart, right, if your property is sitting in the parking lot of a Walmart, you're going to benefit from all those cars that are coming in every single day shopping at Walmart. So those are some important factors to consider. Obviously, you want to look at lease term and cap rate. Generally speaking, the longer the lease term, the lower the cap rate, the higher the price. The shorter the lease term, the higher the cap rate, the lower the price.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Interesting. So you packed a whole lot in there. So the single tenant operators is really what you're looking for. Look for the guarantor of the strength. There's a lot of factors here to consider when you do this. Now, talk about it from an investor standpoint. Let's say Dan and Paul don't want to run this Wendy's, but instead Dan and Paul want to invest in some of this opportunity and get into this cash flow because we're all trying to build our wealth through cash flow and real estate, cash flow appreciation, that sort of thing. So how do we approach this when we want to get into this market?
Great question. So really two avenues, and it just depends on how much money you have, right? If you're if we in your example are trying to buy a property and we've got $2 or $3 million, well, hey, we can buy a single tenant net lease property. We can own it a fee simple interest. We can choose to buy it in cash. We can choose to leverage it, whatever we want, right? Now, if you don't have that much money, you might have 20, 50, 100,000. The only avenue, I shouldn't say the only. There are a few avenues that are open for you in that case, okay? And the avenues that are open for you in that case are going to be, number one, you could just invest in a real estate investment trust, right? You could buy, Agree, you could buy Four Corners Property Trust, you could buy Spirit Realty, any of these companies, right? Those are all options for you. You're not going to get any of the benefits of tangible real estate ownership. You're not going to be able to participate in appreciation or depreciation. You're not going to be able to leverage. None of that is existent. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just that's just one way. The other way is going to be to invest in syndications, in joint ventures, where somebody is buying a shopping center, for example. I've got a great client. He has a fund. People invest $20, $50, $100,000 at a time with him or more, and he then takes that money, calls me, and says, "Dan, let's buy some shopping centers," and he manages them and then provides a return to the investors. And they do participate in the benefits of real estate ownership. So that would be the option that would be available to people who don't have access to enough capital to buy the property, as a just kind of a purchase, but rather need to be part of a pooling of capital. So both of those avenues exist, and I would strongly recommend looking into them depending on where you're at on that capital spectrum.
So, okay, well, in addition to the capital spectrum, so what about the experience spectrum? I mean, would you recommend, since you've seen a lot, you've come from, converting your first house that you bought into, a more usable space all the way into this commercial space, and you're placing a lot of these deals. Someone who has no experience there, I mean, does it make sense to maybe get involved in a syndication up front so they can kind of learn the process and they're not risking a tremendous amount of capital before they go and say, okay, I've got, I'm going to dive in. Maybe I've got a couple million. I personally have a couple of friends that just sold some car washes, and they have bought they did a couple of ground up construction on a few. One was a Take 5 oil change place. There might've been two of those. And I think one of these sleep number places. So they're doing it with the cash to deploy. They wanted to avoid some of the tax consequences of the sale of their business. And so, they 1031 a lot of that. And so there are people that are in that boat for sure, but these guys were also very seasoned in real estate and commercial because they built their business, through car washes and commercial real estate. And it was all about a lot of the things you talked about. What are the traffic counts? We're
Yeah.
positioning and all that.
Yeah. So listen, I'm a bit of a control freak when it comes to investments. So like for me, I needed certain things, right? I needed familiarity with, and again, this is if I'm not doing it myself, which I think is the direction of where we're headed with this question. But, I needed familiarity with the deal, which I had, right? Because as I mentioned, I had underwritten it just as a friend, as another set of eyes. This is maybe number one, I needed comfort and assurance from the sponsor, from the person putting the deal together. Now, this is someone I look up to. This is someone that I have a close relationship with. This is someone who I've done deals before with. So, very comfortable. I did look at a ton of deals before I decided to put capital into this one. And a lot of them sounded great, but like these were people that I didn't know any more than seeing their posts on LinkedIn, right? Which is a great start. Okay. But ultimately for me, it was all about the relationship. So, look, if you're talking about a single family house flip in Detroit, Michigan, right, at the time where I was spending, or Metro Detroit, I was spending 40, 50, 60,000, 70,000 on a single house, you're not talking huge dollars. So the risk is limited, right? But when you're talking $4 million for a net lease property or a shopping center, that's a lot more money. So I would say yes. Look, if you can find the right sponsor who you trust and you can find the right deal that you believe in, yes, it might be wise to invest your money there. I will caution you, you're going to get a return, hopefully, right? That's the goal. I don't really believe that you're going to gain that much knowledge or understanding of the process because most sponsors don't have time for that. They're busy running the deals. They're not there to teach you what's going on. In terms of how do you accomplish both, how are you successful, and at the same time learning and not taking too much risk, I think maybe do a few of those deals or find a way to get enough capital to eventually do one on your own, or find a sponsor that is willing to teach you. Maybe you find a sponsor and they say, I'm raising $3 million, and you say, okay, here's 50. And they say, if you can help me raise another 100,000 or whatever the number is, I'll just keep you, right here with me the whole way along and teach you the process. So that's a great way to do it. I'm fortunate because I got to learn through brokerage, through my job, which not everybody has that opportunity, right? So I would say that, it really depends on what you want to do. You don't ever have to learn it, like to do it yourself. You can just invest in syndications and joint ventures and partnerships, LPs and all that stuff for the rest of your life if you want to. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I do think that the more you learn, the more effective you're going to be and the easier it's going to be to spot those great investments.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for about ROI, but I'm more for return of your capital, and so you have to have some. I believe you have to have some semblance of what you're getting into. When you buy any kind of an investment, you may not be an expert, and so use the word here a couple of times: a sponsor that you trust, someone that you trust, someone's got a track record, and that's harder and harder to find today as we delve into this world of AI and everything is artificial and more artificial. But I think to me that's the most significant thing, and it's going to be even more important going forward in business than even in the past. What about just kind of wrapping up, because you're someone who is highly focused in the space. So and I know there's a big difference between a residential real estate agent and a commercial agent and broker. For someone who wants to cross the chasm, there are a lot of people in residential that kind of dabble in commercial, right? And so, and I often, my oft repeated, I'll say wisdom is be careful there, right? Just because there's a lot you don't know. I see it on the transaction side when I get a deal come through and a residential real estate agent was involved, and great people, and that they're everyone has the best intention, but not necessarily. There's a lot of things that they don't know, right? So if someone is interested in this space, I mean, tell me how you as a commercial broker in general, but then specifically about yourself, how you serve clients and help them that might be interested in doing something like this, Dan.
So are you speaking more towards the investor client, or are you saying for agents or people that are looking to get into commercial brokerage?
No, more about the investor.
I mean, look, I don't even know where to start. I mean, in some cases, I'll give you a great example. I sold a Wendy's for someone. 1.837 million is what we sold it for. This was a couple years ago. And great guy. I love talking to him. I probably learned more from this guy than almost anybody I've ever learned from. very humble, didn't tell me much, didn't know like what was in his portfolio. As we started talking, as we started going through transaction, I said, "Oh wow, this guy's got more than I thought." And that was it. Sold the property. He was happy. Sent him a bottle of liquor. He sent me a nice note back. Life is good, right? That's normal brokerage transaction. A couple months later, I was actually recording a podcast, and I got out of the studio, and I saw I missed a call from him twice. And I picked up the phone. And I said, "Hey, what do you want to sell?" He said, "Wait a minute. How do you know I want to sell something?" I said, "Because you never call me, and you certainly never call me twice." So he said, "Okay, you're right. I got some resorts I want you to sell." And I said, "Okay, fine. Not my specialty." He trusted me, but not my specialty. And we were talking, and he said, "I think they're worth $32 million." So I said, "Okay," made a little mental note of that. Went back to the office, did some homework, pulled some comps, scratched my head for a while on it, talked to some colleagues. I came back. I said, "I think I can get you 45." He said, "No way." I said, "I think I can." I said, "In order to assure you, I want to list it at 47. Okay? And that way we have a little bit of room." Long story short, I sold those resorts for over $47 million. And here's an individual, had somebody come up to them and said, "Hey, I want to buy your resorts." He would have said, "Okay, 32 million, right?"
Right.
Due to my advisory services, he was able to take another $15+ million and put in his pocket. That's a perfect example of just a day-to-day, hey, this is what I do to add value to my clients. Another thing is my clients are busy, right? I've got developer clients that are flying all over the country 5 days a week, looking for sites, dealing with cities, dealing with tenants, doing all that side of the business. They hire me to handle everything else. So my job is behind the scenes to be juggling every single aspect, right? To be on top of title, to be on top of third party, environmental, survey, property condition assessment, to make sure that escrow is moving smoothly, to do everything so that they can go out there and do what they do and develop properties. So, really the value that I add is not only the advisory of, hey, yeah, your property's not worth 32 million, it's worth 47 million plus, right? But also to make sure that you can focus on what you do best. Let me handle the transaction. Let me get you the best buyer possible. And, I always tell people, I want my clients to think that a real estate transaction is the easiest, simplest, smoothest thing they've ever done. Because from them, that's exactly what it should be, right? My job is to handle everything else.
Awesome. Well said. Very exciting, and what a very cool story, Dan. So how do people get in touch with you when they want to get involved at some level in the commercial space and they want to play?
Sure. So first of all, highly encourage people to reach out. Like, it's one of my favorite things. I probably take a call every week or two from people who are new investors or getting into the brokerage industry or having trouble. And, I love to help out. My favorite thing is when they call back 6 months later and say, "Dan, look at what I did over the last 6 months." And then I get to really, have that sense of like, wow, that's amazing. It just feels good. So please reach out. Number one, I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I put out daily content. First name is Dan, last name Lewkowicz, Lewkowicz. Again, Lewkowicz. The picture should look like me. I think there's one other Dan Lewkowicz, but he's in France. But anyway, yeah, reach out to me there. Additionally, and follow me. Send me a DM. Tell me that, hey, I was listening to this podcast, and that's why I reached out. Additionally, I'll give out my personal cell phone number. If you have a deal you want to buy, if you want to sell your property, if you want to know what it's worth, if you have a deal and you just want an extra set of eyes on the deal, even though it's not mine, or you just want to talk shop in real estate, please reach out. I'm here to help. I love doing it. My phone number is 248-943-2838. Again, that's 248-943-2838. And it would be my pleasure to help in any way I can.
Dan, that's awesome. I appreciate it. We'll get that in show notes too, so it's available for everyone. I appreciate your time and perspective. Great conversation on triple net lease investing. I mean, we've done a lot of these shows, and you're the only one that's talked about it. So, it's a fascinating concept to me, and I think it's going to open some eyes and some perspectives on opportunity out there that you just don't hear about a lot. So, I appreciate that, man.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Have an amazing day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Hey, gang, just winding down here today. Thanks for listening to the show. And as always, if you need capital to grow your business, you're looking to purchase commercial real estate or build a building or invest in commercial real estate, or you're looking to to acquire a business or a competitor, or just need growth capital, we'd love to talk to you. We fund businesses all day long. Our mission is to help entrepreneurs win and to fund their businesses and fund their dreams so that they can make an impact in their community. Reach out to me today. Go to our website, click the button to schedule a 20-minute conversation, discovery call. We'll have a quick conversation, see if there's a need, see if there's a fit, and we can take it from there. The website is VPC, Victor Paul Charlie .capital. That's VPC.capital. All right, there's no .com on that. It's VPC.capital. As always, keep crushing it and hope to see you soon around here. Take care.